Before Gettysburg, before any of the controversies of the American Civil War, before all the stories unfolded, there was this place. And this place, this is Malvern Hill. Out here on this field, there was a young man. His name, Francis C. Barlow. And he's standing right here in this position where I'm at right now, behind these lines of cannon. And he's watching events unfold. Events that are so horrible that no man could ever imagine the events that happened here on this field. It was called the killing field. And it was not war. It was simply murder. It's July 1st, 1862, and the Union Army has been on the move trying to get to Richmond. But they've been pushed back to this position that we're at right now, which is Malvern Hill. In this position, there's 250 guns out here waiting for the Confederate Army. And behind these guns is Francis C. Barlow. Francis C. Barlow is a Harvard-educated lawyer. He's a very smart man. And he knows that he's going to see more death and destruction unfold out here. But this time, instead of attacking a position or moving forward, Francis is sitting behind the lines here, watching it all unfold. He sees the position that he's in. He sees the height. He sees the location of where the guns are placed. And he knows that this is a very good defensible position. Perhaps what he learns here at Malvern Hill will determine the way he reacts just 1 year later. Out here on this field today, it's kind of hard to see exactly what Malvern Hill really looks like because it's no longer the turned out field or farm field that it used to be. Some of the location is wide open and cleared out here at the major national park portion, as you can tell by looking out in front. And then there are houses that are placed roughly in the position where houses historically were back during the battle, including this one back here. But if you were to see on the other side here, the field just drops off. And back here, it drops off. It's a huge hill. On this side, another cliff that goes right off the side. And then back out front, the Confederates coming from this direction are going straight uphill. Over here, it's still an upward angle. Over here, it's an upward angle from a creek that's down below. So at all points, these Confederates are coming up a hill, in this case through a woodlot that's so thick that it's hard to keep formation. And they're doing this with a coordinated effort that was given by an order that essentially said, listen for somebody to yell. And that's paraphrasing, of course. The order was not very good. It essentially said that when Armistead's men, or Armistead, determined that it was time to charge, he would let out the yell, and then everybody would coordinate their attacks based on that sound. Well, here we are on this ground, And there are 250 of these going back and forth in this position and firing in that position towards them, towards these guys, towards these guys. And these Confederate soldiers are supposed to hear a rebel yell that's loud enough that indicates to all of these units that have been told to come up and do a coordinated effort to attack here, a full frontal assault just like at Gaines' Mill, and push the enemy from the hill. Well, that does not happen here. And what results is essentially people like Francis Barlow sitting back here behind the lines and directing and instructing soldiers and waiting for the enemy to come. And what does he see out here? A whole lot. Now you remember a minute ago, we were standing right over here where those cannons were talking about Francis Barlow, and I was telling you about the hill dropping off. I'm walking down into an area where some of the cannons were also located, facing one of those downward drops. I'm going to flip this around here, and you can look behind me and see the drop-off I'm talking about. There it is, straight downhill. This is why they call it Malvern Hill. Not only is it just an elevated surface out here, which apparently is a traffic pattern for jet airplanes, but it's a hill. You can clearly see this. Any soldier coming up around this area here is going to have to scale these heights. They're going to have to come up this hill in order to meet the enemy here at Malvern Hill. Off in this direction, the Confederates would be coming from here too. They never quite make it to this spot. They never quite make it this far. As a matter of fact, we'll walk over here to the other side and I'll point out the area where they most likely got as close as they possibly could get to the battle lines over here at Malvern Hill. If you look down in the distance there, right about there, that's about as close as it came. The Confederate soldiers got to that point and they were stopped dead in their tracks with the Union guns that are here on this hill. They were raked clean. And a lot of the soldiers that died out here, they didn't die by musket fire or carbine fire, gunfire. They died by cannon fire. Cannonballs lopping their heads off. Grape shot coming across this field at close quarters. Explosions of all kinds. And not only the cannons from this hill here, the 250, but you had guns from the James River, from the boat that's out there, firing overhead massive artillery pieces. The worst part about that is when they were firing, those guns were lopping ammunition over here behind the lines and actually killing some of their own men. This place was a torrent of death. It's amazing anybody survived. So I don't know if you can see this out here in this position where we're at right now, but this is a large divot in the ground, and the ground rises up over here, rises up over here, and then starts to rise over here again. Now remember, we said the Confederates are coming in from this position. They're going to end up in those woods far back, and they're going to start making their way forward. Well, in this position here, General Couch found that the uneven terrain in this section was less favorable for artillery. So he chose to push his infantry forward of the guns, placing brigades under Abercrombie, Howe, Palmer on this area to prevent the attacking Southerners from staging a successful assault. Also, to our right here, Couch's men repelled charges of D.H. Hill's Confederate division during the heat of the battle. And as the advanced Union brigades became fought out, reinforcements marched past the West House and arrived here to assist Couch and his regiments. Way back in the distance there is the West House that we're talking about. So these Confederates need to come up over here and attack the artillery positions way back there. But they can't even get to that position because we have artillery here, facing in this direction, facing in this direction. And we have Confederates that are trying to come up over the ridge line here to fight. Now this is much earlier in the fight itself. This is a pretty neat perspective to have here. Unfortunately, the woodlot here blocks any of the terrain out in that direction, or we would be able to see the rest of the battlefield off in that direction. Now, before we get into any more details out here, let's back it up just a little bit. George B. McClellan has decided on this grand plan that he was going to come up through the peninsula and he was going to race to Richmond. He's going to take the capital by storm. And his plan essentially is to get there, stop the Confederate government from existing, capture as many people as possible, create as few deaths as possible along the way, and then return the country back to the way it was. He's not out here with the intentions of freedom of enslaved people. And most of the people in the army at that time aren't even talking about that. It doesn't happen really until after Malvern Hill. Malvern Hill happens, and Abraham Lincoln starts to realize the Confederate's not going to stop. Confederacy is going to continue to be a thing. They have to make this more about something else than just going to war to return it to the Union. That's when the slavery story really starts, and that's when this thing turns into something bigger than just a war to preserve a nation. It's one failure after another for McClellan. He continues to fight and get pushed back from one position to another. Now, when I say failure, I don't mean defeat. The Union Army's not getting defeated at all points. They're just falling back and reconnoitering in another position. Eventually, the Battle of Glendale happens just prior to this battle. And at that position, it was another uncoordinated attack by the Confederate Army that was bungled and could have been a really good opportunity. When they get here to Malvern Hill, there's an opportunity on both sides of this hill, if you will. The Union Army finally is in a all up and concentrated position. The Confederate Army is all up and concentrated. Never again in this entire war will the Confederate Army have the opportunity that it has right here at Malvern Hill. Never again will they have the closeness in numbers that they had here at Malvern Hill. This was about as good as it's going to get for them. And Robert E. Lee knows he has to press the attack and he has to make something happen. But what do you have happen here? Well, you have terrible maps. You have officers that really are not coordinating together the way they're supposed to. You have orders that are misunderstood. You have Jackson, who continues to bungle things left and right out here in different locations and different battles. This is probably the worst example for him during the entire American Civil War. And then you make it here to Malvern Hill, and it is just one of the best positions that artillery could ever have. We're going to talk a little bit about that artillery. So what would Barlow have seen here at this position? Historically speaking, there were a couple of slave cabins, maybe more than just a couple, out here. This row of undergrowth here is a historic road, a historic lane that used to be out in front of the crew house. And if you look on this sign, you see the crew house, which is off in that distance over there, and the slave cabins, which would have been probably roughly where we're at right now. And this sign tells a story about Edwin F. Jemison, the 17-year-old that died out here on this field at Malvern Hill. His picture made famous back in the Civil War, and then made even more famous thanks to Ken Burns' documentary. Across this field here, Paul J. Simms's Confederates would have been in this area trying to attack those cannons right there on that hill. all stretched out across this hill. They get to right about here, and they start using the slave cabins as a position to take cover from. They're trying to not die, essentially. That's really all it is. Because in this position, those cannons are raking this wide open field as soon as these guys are coming up. And then they're dealing with counterattacks from infantrymen who are able to come out into this position and counterattack. The next morning, Francis Barlow's peering across this field. And what he likely sees is a long line of Confederate soldiers stretched out here in a perfect neat line, lying dead on this ground. Because late into the evening, when the Confederates were still trying to mount an attack out here, trying to coordinate something, this last failed attack would leave Confederate soldiers all over the place in perfect neat lines as they were killed out here trying to take this position. One man described this field as a perfect crawling field the next day of dead and dying, arms and legs moving, soldiers groaning, and dead men all over the place. That's what young Francis C. Barlow sees out here. And I say young relatively because he's 27, 28 years old when he's out here fighting this fight. But just imagine that. You are standing up on this hill and you've been watching those Confederate soldiers over there attack this position multiple times, and they are not able to take this position. Your lesson that day is position is everything. It is key to what you do on a battlefield. After this battle, Francis C. Barlow will go on to use those lessons, and he'll be known as a tough soldier, and he'll rise in rank real quick. So Francis Barlow ends up leaving these fields behind, and he moves on in the American Civil War. He ends up getting wounded. He ends up fighting his heart out on these fields, and time again, it seems like Robert E. Lee is in all places at once, and that army is defeating the Union Army. By the time Chancellorsville is over with, Francis Barlow is frustrated with his corps. He's disgusted with them. He thinks that they're cowards, that they're shirkers, and they are primarily German. So maybe he has some sort of feelings about that too. I never really know. One thing's for sure, by the time he gets to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, he's not real happy with his men, and they're not real happy with him either. You can sense when a leader doesn't really like you. So this is where the controversy takes off. He's put in a position and given orders, but he takes liberty with those orders and he interprets them the way that he wants to. And some would say, arguably, that he actually failed to follow orders. And he extends his line almost a mile out from the original position he was supposed to be in. He ends up in a place called Blotcher's Knoll in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And out there on that knoll, he's created a salient out from the main lines. But what he does is he accidentally creates a trap for himself. Now, if you've ever been there before, you'll recognize some of the terrain. The gentle sloping upward, the hill that's off in the distance here, a lot like Blotcher's Knoll. Now, of course, there's no giant hill coming up from the left or the right, but the elevation is very important. And he's learned that throughout his entire Civil War career as a soldier, that position is everything. So he moves his men out there because he thinks he's doing the right thing. But what ends up happening is, after defending multiple attacks from the Confederacy in that position, he then has to fall back. His soldiers end up running back through the town, and he is left behind for dead. So earlier I said we were going to talk about that artillery a little bit more. The position that I'm in right now is a Confederate artillery position. At this little ridge here, there was supposed to be a dozen or more cannons probably brought up. They were going to bring up cannons and place them here and over that way in Poindexter Farm. And the point was to converge the fire onto this position right back there. You can see way off in the distance the ridgeline of Malvern Hill where the 250 cannons are supposed to be at. And if they get these cannons coordinated here in time the way that they're supposed to, the fire will converge, it will knock out batteries, it'll clear the way so that the soldiers then can come across these fields and charge valiantly towards the enemy. Probably sounds familiar. Sounds a whole lot like Gettysburg, July 3rd. The only difference is at this time in the war, the Confederates do not have their batteries together the way that they do during Gettysburg. They are not as coordinated. So when these Confederate cannons come up, they don't get the dozen or so guns in place like they're supposed to. And as they put their guns on this battery line here on the hill, the Union soldiers are aiming in, they've got the position honed in just fine, and they are knocking out Confederate guns left and right. And these guys are scrambling out in disarray and then moving back up. The way the Confederate artillery works at this time is that the units are basically assigned to groups of infantry soldiers. So a division or so will end up with their own unit of artillery. Eventually, they realize that this isn't working out. The Confederate artillery out here is not doing what it's supposed to do. And when the Confederates come from that wood line over there and expose themselves and go across this field, they are facing a lot of danger. Possibly when they look through their field glasses across the field there, they see Union soldiers and their cannons moving off the hill. They might see them moving back, or maybe they disappeared, or maybe 2 or 3 of them are gone. And they might have mistaken that for their cannons actually doing their jobs. But what's really happening is, when these cannons are getting hot over there and they can't be used, they're getting too hot. They are being moved back behind the hill, and more Union cannons are being brought up to put in place. So, it's kind of a false hope. And then it happens. That so-called rebel yell from one person or one group that was supposed to set it all off happens. And the next thing you know, a very uncoordinated attack, one after another, starts happening across this field. And part of that attack is another man that's out here on this field who is also a lawyer. He's a little bit older. It's John B. Gordon. Now, somewhere around 5 p.m., John B. Gordon's men will step off from these woods, and they'll come forward, and they'll start the attack. Multiple units will come out of those woods, and the woods off to my left-hand side, and they will start moving forward. One man, James J. Hutchinson of the 5th Alabama, said, "As we came fully in sight of the Federal batteries, not 400 yards distant in our front, the open space behind them became black with troops, thousands of whom issued from the woods in their rear. It was madness to go on, but our men moved steadily forward till within 250 yards, when the order was given to fire, and they immediately, without orders, dropped to the ground and began loading and firing as fast as possible." Now imagine being out here on this field in Gordon's men, and you're in that line marching across this field, and you get to within 250 yards, and when you look behind those cannons, you see thousands and thousands of soldiers back there prepared and ready to fight you if you make it past that position, which you of course don't. Across that field, they would be marching into a maelstrom of iron lead. The artillery would blast the attackers with canister, which basically means iron balls are coming out of the end of that cannon, multiple of them, slinging across this field and ripping holes into those Confederate lines. John B. Gordon is a lawyer, just like his opponent. But John B. Gordon's learning a different lesson out here than what Francis C. Barlow is learning. He's not standing in a position and watching attackers come on. He's actually charging across these fields with his men and coordinating the effort that's happening out here. He's watching what happens to his men going across this field. He's in the fight. It's a very different story for Alabama and John B. Gordon. John Gordon will move on from this battle, and he'll learn more lessons just like Francis C. Barlow will. He'll end up in some of the same battles, majority of the same battles actually. In Antietam, he will take a massive wound there from sitting in a position watching attackers come on. Kind of like Francis Barlow sitting over here watching attackers come on. So the roles are reversed a little bit. But then the story emerges that the two of them somehow, some way, faithfully would end up meeting there at Blotcher's Knoll in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And thanks to John Gordon, according to the story, Francis Barlow is nursed back to health. He allows a very special person to come out there to him and take care of him. All right, so now I'm going to walk down here towards that wooded lot where Gordon's men would have come out of, and many other Confederate soldiers would have marched out of here too. This is an area that not too many people visit. You don't see it in videos very often, and thanks to the American Battlefield Trust, a lot of the land is preserved on the other side of this, where those Confederate soldiers are getting their stuff together to get into this battle. Very important land, by the way, and not to mention very well preserved. It wasn't developed or torn up or turned into something else. So it is an exceptional piece of land to walk. And if you ever have the chance to come out to Malvern Hill, take the path from the Confederate artillery position through the woods on the other side and look at that land. It's wonderful. Now out in this wooded area out here, I don't know if you can see it or not on this camera, but some of these men are going to be coming off of a hill. And that hill, you can see how it dips down here. And then there's the path that takes you back out to Malvern Hill. This hill goes down a flat lane, steadily rises, plateaus, and then when you get down to the other side, there's a dip down and then a back up on a hill again. So this is a pretty amazing position to be in, to kind of see where these Confederate soldiers for John B. Gordon were coming from. Now, I don't know about you, but that's a pretty amazing view. To be able to see exactly where these soldiers are marching from going into this battle here at Malvern Hill. Now, we haven't focused a whole lot on Francis Barlow yet, other than to tell his story about where he came from and where he's positioned out here on this field. And it's mostly because Francis Barlow doesn't make too much of a name for himself out here. He's across the field over there doing his job, essentially. He's doing what he's asked him to do. He's holding his position, and he's doing it very well. So if you're Gordon's men stepping out of these woods right here behind me, and you're heading off into the distance, what you see in front of you is you see that hill. The cannons, your cannons, are placed in front of you. There's a line of them up there, and they are taking cannon fire. So they become a target, which means you are now a target because you're walking towards that position. Once you get up there, the cannons have to go silent. They can't fire with you directly in front of them. So for a moment, everything is going to go silent here with those cannons. And then once you get out far enough, they're going to start blasting again from behind you over your head towards the enemy out in front. Now, that doesn't happen the entire time, because once soldiers get to a certain point on this field, they can't fire without the ability to do it safely. So what happens is they fire until they get to a certain point, and then they stop firing because they don't want to kill their own men. So as a soldier, you're marching up through here, and you can hear the combat going on. You can hear the screaming and yelling ahead of you, the soldiers that have gone before you, and you might even start seeing a lot of soldiers coming back this way, people who are wounded, bleeding, the chaos of men running in all directions, trying to get away from the fight, if they're lucky enough to get off this field and head back towards their lines, because a lot of those men are actually trapped over there on that field. They lay down on the ground in the low ridges. So this is a pretty amazing and crazy thing that these common soldiers are having to walk into. And they're headed towards Francis Barlow. And meanwhile, he's back there behind those lines doing his job. And I guarantee you he can see what's happening out in front. So let's talk about Barlow a little bit. Barlow's out here as a young man rising in the ranks, and he's fighting here on this hill, protecting his position. So he learns his lessons here at Malvern Hill, just like he learned them all throughout the 7 days battles. Move forward into Antietam, Barlow is wounded, attacking the sunken lane or the bloody lane. So here we go, Gordon, Barlow, similar results at the bloody lane. We move on from there, he gets to Chancellorsville, and he writes about his indignation and disgust with the Corps' performance that he was with. So he's got something against those men. He doesn't like the way that they performed out there. And he ends up in charge in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Fast forward July 1st, 1863. The Battle of Gettysburg has opened up over there, and Barlow receives orders. He decides to stretch his men out forward, and some historians say against the orders that he actually received. He's in charge of the 1st Division. He gets his men out there, stretches them across that knoll, and von Gilsa's men, for example, about 900 strong, were stretched out so far, there was one man for every 2 yards. That's a pretty thin line for Napoleonic fighting. He gets attacked on one end by Gordon. He gets attacked on another by Doles. His position's untenable, and he's quickly being surrounded. So the men there, they fight. They put up one heck of a fight. Even Gordon said so, saying that they came on in waves, one after another, trying to push them from that position until they got within about 50 yards of seeing their flags. So that's how long those men actually held on and fought there before they had to leave that position. They just had to. And they end up through the town of Gettysburg. Barlow is left behind. Barlow has to learn a hard lesson. And according to what some people say, Gordon meets Barlow there, face to face. And he allows him to get aid while he's there. And he does what those officers typically did during that time. They took care of each other. And for that, Barlow survives that predicament that he's in Gettysburg and makes it back to his unit. The war would end very differently for Barlow and Gordon. Barlow continues to rise in rank, and so does Gordon. Both of them end up with a fierce reputation for fighting. The Union Army wins the war. John B. Gordon goes back to trying to have a life that he can have with the holes in his face and representing himself very well in history, actually. Both of them think that each other are dead. This is where it gets tricky. Now, according to old wartime stories, Gordon and Barlow meet each other for the first time at some sort of a dinner in Washington, D.C. And the both of them had thought that each other had died during the war, which is kind of funny. Both of them probably should have died during the war. Fate would have it that they would survive their terrible wounds. When they realize that they have survived the war, they become friends, and they start talking about the old times. And according to one story, Barlow is very thankful to Gordon for essentially saving his life there in Gettysburg. But that's where the good story ends. A lot of people are saying that this was simply not true, that these were stories that were passed down through the generations, wartime stories, that were kind of made a little bit better by age. That maybe the men had actually met each other, realizing that the other was still alive, but that was pretty much where it ended. So there's really no way of saying for sure what happened there during those meetings. In 1864, the news for Francis Barlow is pretty bad. He loses Arabella to typhus. She was a nurse throughout the war, and she twice nursed him back to health. Later on, after the war is over with, he ends up marrying Ellen Shaw, who was Robert Goldshaw's sister. He goes to New York and becomes a prominent lawyer up there, helping to establish the American Bar Association, and also prosecuting some pretty big names in that state, and become the state's attorney general at one point in time. He ends up dying of Bright's disease on January 11th of 1896. And that would be the end of Francis Barlow's story there, but his legend would continue on for his actions here at Malvern Hill and other battles in the American Civil War. So I guess the greater question here, or series of questions to ask yourself when walking this field and thinking about Francis Barlow: was he a super brave man that just learned a really good lesson here at Malvern Hill, and then go on to Gettysburg and apply that lesson in the very wrong way? He's on a hill here. He sees what's happening in front of him. He knows how strong a defensible position this rise in the ground is. And when he gets to Gettysburg, he applies that. Is his decision changed and altered in Gettysburg because of his experience here at Malvern Hill? We have to remember the 7 days battles for a lot of these guys that are in leadership positions really is the testing ground for them. It changes them. It creates the mentality that they have for the rest of the war. It also changes Robert E. Lee's outlook on the war too. He learns some lessons here as well. He learns who he can trust and who he can't trust. And he ends up replacing some commanders and sending them in positions where they will never affect a battlefield again. Malvern Hill is a very special place. And it's not just because of the battle that happened here. It's because of the lessons that unfold in this place and the brave men that fought out here and died out here. This place, if you were standing on this field July 1st in 1862, where I'm standing right now, and you could see what they saw, would you move forward and fight that position? I'm not sure I would. But that's a decision that those men had to make. And just like any other story that I tell here on this channel, it's based in written documents, accounts, articles, anything I can get my hands on to try to make it as accurate as possible. But it's also not to the letter of the book. So if you have more that you can add to this story, then by all means put it in the comments section. Tell the story fully and completely and give us more. I'm sure that the rest of the viewers out there would like to hear more about it. If you know of any other articles or any other letters or correspondence that can add something to this, by all means, add it to the comment section, and I will attach that to my description so that people can go to it and read about it. But it has to be from a legitimate source so that it can be understood properly. Well, I hope you have enjoyed our little story here from Malvern Hill about Francis C. Barlow and John B. Gordon, two men that opposed each other on this field with very different results that would end up meeting at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, also with very different results. It's a lot of fun out here. Until next time, this is History with Waffles from Malvern Hill.